Thank you very much, Frans. That's a great contribution. And now we're joined on stage by all our contributors, and we've also joined by Joe Dunne as well, who is the Food Partnership Coordinator with Middlesbrough Environment City. Now, when we were planning this conference, food security, food poverty came up quite a bit in our discussions, and we thought it would be great to invite Joe along to contribute his little bit. Or big bit. So we've had lots of great questions put to us. As we're talking, we've got a decent amount of time now until 11:45. So if any questions arise whilst we're discussing, please put them in the Q&A session tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll do my best to address them to the panel as they come up. So, without further ado, I shall start on with some questions in no particular order. Let's have a look. Somebody, here, Julie Harrison has talked about the chemical and industrial sites in the Tees area, about including more green space. Now, there's a fantastic heritage, isn't there, of nature conservation actually within the Tees estuary. So maybe Paul, are you best placed to sort of pick this up? I'm thinking about all the work of Inca and the likes. I think you'll have to unmute.
Well, so the answer is probably not. However, it's an interesting point because it was something I'd thought about mentioning before. I have an echo. I don't know whether can you hear an echo? No. Okay.
Okay, fine.
Well, if you fly over the Tees Valley in an aeroplane, you see that the large industrial conurbation is quite tightly packed. But within that, the way that the chemical industry and the steel industry was laid out, there are large spaces that are we would call sterile for very good reasons. And I think that's about to the point. It's about now thinking about that in a different way. They were sterile. They were left there for a very specific reason, and so you don't have you're not building houses there or anything else there. However, the point is a good one, that we should now be thinking about those spaces that have to be sterile and have to have a distance between plant A and plant B, but how you would then use that land, for the benefit of nature in a way that hasn't been thought about before. It goes back to so I think it's a good point, and I think it's something that both all of the sites, the Billingham site, the North Tees site, the whole of the north side of the river and the south side of the river. If you on the one hand, Tees Valley could be seen as quite small, relatively. On the other hand, it's quite big, where you've got a lot of this land that can be, let's say, repurposed, in the sense that we're talking about here. In the same way, in the same way I was talking before about when we're considering, repurposing or regenerating housing stock, is about the creation of green space and allowing nature to thrive. It's the same thing, and so it's about having a joined up strategy that sort of where all that works together going forwards. And I say I'm minded, if you walk along the river, along the paths you can walk along there, there are large tracts of land. And I'm not sure who owns them. It might be France's PD ports, but all the way along, there's land that we could far better use to. From an environmental, from a natural point of view. So the point is well made, and I do think it calls for a joined up strategy between industry, the local authorities, government, to come and work together to produce that really does maximise the use of that land that is lying moribund at the moment.
Yes, thanks, Paul. And yes, there are some really exciting plans, which hopefully will get picked up in the nature recovery section. That's going to be, the panel is going to be chaired by Graham Hull from the Environment Agency. And yes, what was seen as sort of derelict land before, some of them is a real mosaic of interesting habitats. Some of our post-industrial habitats are quite exciting in terms of biodiversity and quite different. But there's so much potential there, isn't there? It's sort of hidden away because us as the public don't always see it. So talking of land, I was surprised to find out a few years ago that the Tees Valley is 54% of it is underfarmed or agricultural or horticultural use. So that's quite a lot, isn't it? We think of ourselves as very urbanized, but actually we've still got a lot of farmland. So I'm going to pick up a couple of questions to James on that, about how we can work to enhance nature with farmers to bridge the income gap. I'm not sure what you mean exactly by that, Graham. But also we've got, are any of your farmers that you know of working in a nature-friendly ways, like rewilding, and as part of their own nature recovery, working alongside economic growth? That's from Sharon. So we're looking at what are there some existing examples of farmers already working like this in our area? And if not, can we import them into the area? Can you give us some ideas, James?
Yeah, thank you ever so much. And I think just to clarify, I think the income gap, I think it's true. It's that income gap as farm businesses lose that income that was coming from direct support between now and 2024 and what we're doing that short term. I think that the questions that are coming through are very important points, because I think for many people, if you look at the general messages and unfortunately what can often be soundbite messages, due to the way that we present information to society at the moment, you could be perceived to think that rural areas, the 54% of the region, are barren wastelands, or are almost akin to an industrial Teesside, you could say. But they're not. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and that we proactively and positively work with the agricultural community. We've had a tendency to identify negativity to secure funding to address a problem, rather than actually championing the fantastic work and the modernisation that agriculture are doing. We talk about regenerative agriculture. Well, that means a lot of different things to different people. But if I was speaking to a farmer and asking them about, well, what do you do to reduce your energy and your inputs and create green space, they would talk about it, but they wouldn't talk about it in these terms. And I think this is the challenge that the biggest challenge that we have. We talk about a society, we want green blue places, we want regenerative agriculture, we want more biodiversity. And for maybe mainly the public, but for many of our farm businesses, that they work and live this on a daily basis, and they don't use that same terminology, but they could take you to the pond that's always been in the corner of the field. They can take you to how they have gone to low input agriculture, no-till systems, how they've reduced their inputs, how they are creating buffer strips, how they've maybe taken half the farm and planted it down with trees. These are all activities that they have done, and I think we just need to really sing and celebrate that, and to build that enthusiasm to bring it forward. The gap, it's a critical question. And I think what I would say is for people who are trying to see this as an opportunity, and we see this as an opportunity, we need to collectively create business opportunities to make sure that when those businesses are developing these plans and implementing them, which they are doing now, there's a real tangible cash in the back pocket outcome there. Because at the end of the day, we have to have a fair wage to pay for the activity that's being done, but we also need a fair amount of income to maintain, repair and replace these natural environments, because with climate change, they're going to change.
Thank you, James. And I see that, Joe, you had your hand up. Is there something you want to bring in now?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, James. And it was to kind of, just to put, the majority, so many of these farms are growing food. And this is food which is grown locally, and local food plays a very, very important part in that. I mean, so much of food that is grown sort of locally, it sort of disappears out of our region. Why can't we now start looking and reducing those supply chains, reducing the food miles, and start sort of buying more local food? And so this is where the whole sort of local food sort of agenda and scene can play a very, very important part. It's re-engaging people with where food comes from, and supporting businesses. And so we're looking, and you're thinking a huge sort of organisation such as PD Ports, and how can that sort of do anything, or how can other businesses like that sort of play a part with local food? But they can start buying sort of small amounts, like sort of, shall we say, sort of buffets or corporate dining and that type of thing, start sort of buying, and it's re-engaging people with that, and it's supporting our local economy. And we're all talking about the economic recovery, and so we've got a plethora of phenomenal, fantastic local food, primary, secondary and tertiary producers in this region that are kind of struggling, and even struggling more now because of the pandemic. And everybody can play their part in sort of buying a bit more local food. And then, but it works right across the supply chain. So that's now talking about and engaging with those primary producers, because buying local food isn't buying it from your local Sainsbury's. It's buying from the company, the small businesses that are based here that use it's provenance. It's where that food kind of comes from. And so much of, there's this case that, local food costs more, but potentially, well, it does, yes. And that's because you're paying people a fair wage. People are getting paid a fair wage for what they're doing. But it means all of the environmental costs are kind of built into that product. We see so much sort of globally, these huge sort of multinational organizations, and they really don't have a very good environmental policy, and they kind of almost rape the land dry and extract everything from it without consideration for future. Yet if you're talking about smaller producers, and the land is their lifeblood, it's kind of what they survive on, and if they absolutely ruin it, then it's not going to give them anything in years to come. So we need to be starting to support that, and it's asking for local, looking at the provenance of where that food comes from, so it supports local farmers and local sort of primary producers.
Thank you, Joe, for adding that in. I'm going to pick up a point now that's started by Margaret, and this must be to Tim, because she's asking about projects that will include carbon verified projects to attract offset payments from businesses. So this is really about how do we do all this? How do we actually get there? We've got these aspirations. We're talking to business. It's fantastic that we've got Frans from the business sector, James from the NFU, and Paul from the local enterprise partnership. How do we galvanise this and make it happen? And what are the mechanisms that we're looking at? So, Tim, over to you. I'm just checking, Tim. Are you on mute?
Yes, all right, I'll start again. Okay, so offsetting, and I think offsetting is a really interesting thing because it's quite a controversial concept, and obviously as you develop a market, you might say that's the easy path to people basically not sorting things out and just being able to pay in, and there you are. Clearly, the message needs to be that actually individual actions and actions of companies, everything starts in your own backyard and then builds out from there. But if ultimately your operation, which is providing many other benefits, ultimately requires you to offset something, I think it's important that we do have bankable mechanisms where effectively you have certified schemes. And that could be certified around carbon, it could be around any loss of biodiversity. But I think what you can do is to actually bring everything together, and the idea of the hub is that we actually start to look at the multiple benefits of investment and be able to articulate those properly with a proper return that is ultimately certified. And I think it's, those mechanisms are out there, but you need to be able to develop that. It's looking at the bonds market, the green bonds market, it's potentially another way forward. It's not beyond to think there might be a Tees Valley green bond, effectively that catalyses investment and actually starts to stimulate a local market. So that's just one mechanism. There's quite another sort of framework for this, really, which is actually money we're spending already, but we're not spending it in the right place or spending it in a way that means that we're securing those multiple benefits. So there's people, quite rightly, are potentially taking action in their area, but they're doing it with their own kind of governance structures and their own priorities, and there's nothing wrong with that. But actually, imagine the power if we actually took an idea and went, okay, we've got this strategic objective to do something with, like, riparian environments alongside them. There's lots of riparian owners, alongside, who may or may not feel motivated. But I think if we can gather all the threads of all the people that might be a stakeholder and might be actually making an investment in the first instance, but we bring that investment together, we're going to be securing many more multiple benefits. So there's the strategic planning element to this. And then the certainty of knowing that the thing you're investing in is still going to be there as well, which is actually a really important thing. And then finally, you look at that and you go, well, actually, there's investments you make from the heart, there's investments you make because of the impacts on your pocket, and we're bringing heart and pocket together effectively, aren't we? And I think if we can demonstrate that everybody's actually getting more for their money in terms of the things they're doing, because things are securing multiple benefits, not just for nature, but for health and well-being and for natural flood management, etc., etc., we're starting to build a much better and more clearly articulated picture about where the benefits lie. So, yeah, offsetting is part of it. Individual actions is part of it. I think it's having that blended finance approach, which is agnostic in some ways about where it's actually about the impact that we're going to get from what we're doing.
Thank you, Tim. So my network connection is a little bit patchy, so if there's a bit of a break, then. Yeah, that's great, because actually we need a bit of a translation, don't we? Because we've got willing businesses increasingly, haven't we? And we've got these mechanisms that are coming on board, but it's sort of translating to that. How do we make more nature? How do we get it happening? We've got that aspiration. What do we need to do? The 25-year environment plan is asking for it. There's lots of stuff in the environment bill. It's all quite complex. I mean, anybody that doesn't work in the environment sector must be a little bit bamboozled about, what's all this and how's it blended finance? What does that mean? So, yeah, we're trying to do our best as a partnership to try and translate it and actually make it happen, so that we can really start investing real bucks, real money into recovering our nature. Now, I'm going to pick up another question here about, and it's really interesting to hear what Frans was saying about being, was it the biggest employer in the estuary, the area? Certainly. So employment is a massive thing, isn't it? I mean, at the moment, because of the pandemic that we're coming out of, but particularly in our area, in the Tees Valley. So I'm not sure who's going to pick this up. This is Glyn asking, and it's got lots of likes in our Q&A. So this is about an untapped job market that may address economic and nature recovery. So have we got any ideas about the sort of jobs that are the jobs of the future, and are we a place in the Tees Valley that are going to provide those jobs of the future in this new, shiny, green, recovered economy? Maybe let's start with Paul to begin with, and Frans might want to pick up from there.
Okay, I think back to my earlier point about excuse me about economic, social, and environmental recovery all being synonymous. You remember I talked about biopharma, biomed, bioenergy. That they're all growing sectors, and will require new skill sets to make them grow and be prosperous. But if anybody that sort of goes onto into the Tees Valley, onto the Redcar side, particularly in the next 2 or 3 years, will see lots of new construction jobs, trade jobs. So it's not just about science. You've got to build things, you've got to run things, you've got to operate things, and then all of the supply chains, the service sector that goes with that. If you were running a chemical plant, then you have maintenance teams, you have sort of water treatment organizations. There are all manner of other services that sit in sort of support of that. So I think that the jobs market, it's a curse and a blessing again, because I really do want to see people in the Tees Valley taking up those jobs. It would be a shame and a sin if we ended up having to bring people from somewhere else, because we hadn't actually, back to my very early point about training and lifelong learning starting in schools, to do with giving people the necessary skills to do the whole spectrum of jobs that will be created, green jobs, jobs associated with green industries, and that's a big challenge for us. And I think that's about the local authorities and the Tees Valley Combined Authority and industries working together to find a better way to engage with schools, to inspire school children and people who've been out of work for a long time to go and retrain and upskill into whatever it is they want to do, because the opportunities will be there. And I'm just minded back to the point on offsetting. Well, just to add to what Tim said, I think everybody, everybody wants action now, and that's right. And offsetting is something we can do now. It's not something you do in 5 years' time. It's available now as a means of going on the journey. So it might not be the best thing to do, but it can be done. And for me, it's a bit like a sticky plaster. Whilst let's do that whilst we think of other things to do. So what you will see, particularly around that, I think, is over the next 5 to 10 years, given that and I'm minded also of things like the wind turbines. You go back 10, 15 years, everybody poo-pooed wind turbines. Nobody, and I was one of the naysayers, I have to say, about their effectiveness and their economic ability. And there's a balancing act around how you subsidize, how you incentivize that and nurture it to a point where it becomes profitable. It stops being a market push and becomes being a market pull. And I think, offsetting's in that category. And I think we'll find it becomes quite normal in the next 5 years, subject to that very fine balance of getting the financial packages right, which they need to be. But just back to that was just on that point. So skills, I think there's a whole spectrum of skills. There's a range of jobs, whether you want to be a PhD, sort of bio scientist, or you want to be a construction worker, they're all there to do.
If I might just add to what Paul's saying,
yes,
I want us to feel as though. Sorry, go on. No, effectively, I want us to, be part of this whole thing. The Tees Valley is open for business, and actually the natural environment is part of that. So,
Yes, great. Thank you, Tim. Yes, and I think there's been lots of studies, and I'm going to point out the Centre for Alternative Technology, Net Zero Britain. They've done lots of interesting reports to say that in the transition that we're going through towards net zero, that there might actually be a sort of a spike in energy consumption as we're ready to do for our nature and economy. So, Frans, is there anything that you want to add in, particularly about a potential for employment?
I certainly do. So we are actually in the middle of the biggest recruitment drive in the history of the business. And we are about to take on, and it got slightly delayed of COVID, to take on another 23 apprentices in the next couple of months, which will bring the grand total to 50. But we're going to stretch the envelope on it too, because going back to Paul's point, is that we can see there's lots of changes. So we can see this move from, let's say, hydrocarbon fossil fuels to more electrified. Or electricity. So if you look at the make of your engineering team, there's going to be a natural move from, let's say, mechanical fitters rather than ultimately into electrical engineers. But we also are looking forward. So one of the things that we're creating this mini engineering hub around hydrogen. Because hydrogen is a great thing, and we all sort of understand how it works, but it's actually pretty tricky not only to create hydrogen, well, that's actually not that difficult, but actually to store it and to use it. I mean, I'll give you some startling figures here, but hydrogen, you need to store it at a massive 750 bar. And if hydrogen molecules escape, it travels at 26 meters a second. I mean, that's how not volatile it is, but how quickly it disperses. And so we're going to trial this internal truck by September. But the infrastructure that we need to put into place, but also understand how you run your equipment on hydrogen is actually pretty difficult. So we signed up to, and this is all governed by NDAs, leading equipment manufacturers worldwide, and a lot of them actually in the EU, to actually develop new machines that we use today. And these are massive forklifts, 100-ton forklifts, which need a lot of instantaneous power to lift very heavy equipment, to convert these to hydrogen. which is not that difficult. But these are on with it, and these companies want to have partners in there that actually are willing not only to put their money where their mouth is, but also share the experience that when you start to run the machine, you actually know it might not quite work the way you want it, but you have to go on that learning experience. So going back to Paul's point of view, I think you have to be brave to create those positions and ask the question like, hey, we know a little bit about hydrogen, and in come a whole bunch of graduates who know a little bit about it as well. And then work in conjunction with the colleges, but specifically also the universities. So we talked to Durham University and TSAT University to create this center of excellence around hydrogen to really move it forward. Because with all due respect, I've seen lots of announcements about hydrogen left, right and center across the UK, and everybody talks about it. But I can't, for the life of me, really see any progress other than the announcement that was made by BP on the blue and ultimately green hydrogen announcement in TSAT, which is great. The production about it is fantastic, but that's not the tricky bit. Using it, that's where it becomes slightly more complicated. And I'm actually not going to wait for everybody else to figure it out. I want to be out there and actually leading it. And I know it's going to cost us money, but that's okay, right? That's part of doing business. So if you need if you know a couple of good hydrogen engineers, they need to send me their resumes. So there you go.
Thanks, Frans. That's great. I'm aware we're sort of getting close to the end of our slot in a couple of minutes. We're quite an eclectic bunch on this economic recovery. I do understand that, but of course it's so diverse. What do I ask next? What I'm going to ask next is there anything really burning that any of the panel members want to share in the last few minutes that with our delegates about the role of economic recovery in the way forward in conjunction with nature recovery? Is there anything that you really want to share? Yeah, James.
I think one of the key points is just reminding people that individuals and organisations have a corporate and social responsibility to make sure that they pay a fair share for sustainable and outcomes in nature and for those businesses. Because simply forcing the cost or the carbon requirements and or the risk down the supply chain or to vulnerable communities is never going to be sustainable. So I think it's about making sure that that's happening there. I think the point that Frans just raised is critical as well. We're dealing with commercial decisions and commercial markets. And I can see in the chat some of the questions are around the government announcing this amount of money and the government announcing that amount of money for different initiatives. And they're great. But what we ultimately need is a suite of options. And taking carbon, yep, we can plant trees with the government's funding. Yes, we can plant trees through the carbon code, but we can also do business decisions or other initiatives to sink and sequester carbon through other funding, and that can be direct funding from business to business.
Thank you. We've got a minute left, so Joe,
Rachel,
got, half a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Paul, you can have the last.
No.
Yeah.
I'll just be very, very quick. I mean, it's economic recovery. The New Economics Foundation has undertaken a study. Money's worth 400% more if spent locally. So local food, buying, business, everybody sort of buying a bit more. Where can sort of, and that means jobs, securing jobs, better job opportunities, diversification of jobs, leading to better mental health, better well-being, that type of thing. And everybody can kind of play a part. So an organisation that doesn't buy, is not a food producer, but they do have milk in their tea. They do sort of have corporate dining, that type of thing. If you start, and as Frans said, put your money where your mouth is. Let's kind of, it costs a little bit more, but it means so much to small independent businesses, and that will only grow, and that will only strengthen our local economy and our region. And we've seen it with the pandemic. Things happen, and if we are more stronger sort of locally, that we are much better in that way. So but businesses can also support sort of smaller businesses with sustainability and making their sort of processes more sustainable. I'll stop.
Okay. I don't know if I'm live. My network connection's not very great. So I know Paul wanted to say the closing remarks before that we then move into the marketplace.
Yeah, try and be very quick. I mean, we've talked about the emergence of grid. Can you hear me? I think yes. I think I'm on mute. Very quickly. Get rid of that. Basically, we've got wind power, geothermal power, solar power, tidal power. It's coming. Equally, we talk here about carbon sort of sequestration, storage, and utilization for that matter. And that's right, because that's part of the here and now. But we haven't talked too much what the carbon floor pricing, carbon border adjustments, all going to drive innovation in any event. And we're already, I've learned papers on something called plasma arc reduction of methane to hydrogen and carbon black, where no CO2 is produced at all. And so that helps to value whatever's left, the reserves in the North Sea. So the point is that there is a carrot and a stick there, and whether it's right, whether the balance is right at the moment is a question. We haven't got time to sort of debate that, but it is there, and it's starting to work, and it will drive innovation, and it will actually take us in that direction. So I think, from an economic recovery point of view, go back to finish on what I said. There's a great future ahead of us, but it will be socially inclusive, and it will include the environment and nature as well.
And I couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you very much, Paul, for winding up the session, and also to Frans, to Tim, to James, and Joe. It's been a very productive session. We're going across now to the marketplace, and then straight into the break after that. The lounge is open at any time to go and sit down and grab somebody, but please visit the marketplace. Our stall holders have put lots of effort into talking to you and setting up their stalls, so go and visit them. So you've got a lot of space now to dip in and out of the marketplace and the lounge, and we'll come back at 12:25. Tim will welcome you back, so I look forward to seeing you in the lounge. Take care, everybody.